Hi, my name is Holly. I'm a program manager at Edison Ford Winter Estates. Welcome. If you've joined me before, thanks for coming back. I didn't get to do it last month because of the hurricane, and let me know that you've all been in my thoughts, and I'm glad we're back together. Now I'm in front of Mina's Moonlight Garden. I think it was originally called Mina's Memory Garden, and it's at Christmas time that I'm in. And the reason I picked this, even though it's kind of hard to see, is because I think it's really how Mina made a beautiful space in the Moonlight Garden. And this is all about Mina, a woman I greatly admire, and I will give you as much information as I can about her as we go along. Mina Miller Edison, benefactor of Fort Myers. And there's a picture of her, I believe, with her first child, Madeline Edison. And at the end, I hope you know why I put that she's a benefactor of Fort Myers. My goal was to focus mostly on Fort Myers, but I realized I had to put some other information about her life. And honestly, I could have done a 5-part series on her. So there's a lot more out there that I hope will inspire you to research or reach out and ask questions. And definitely come back to visit Edison Ford Winter Estates. It's Thomas Edison's legacy, but it's also Mina's. And yes, we did have some damage, but they've been working hard to get it clean up. And fortunately, it didn't damage the homes or the lab or the museum. And the Edisons went through many hurricanes. I don't think anything quite like what we've gone through, but I do think they would understand. They weren't here during season, but they would return. So we'll get started with this now. Mina Miller was born in Akron, Ohio on July 6, 1865, the 7th of 11 children. She was the daughter of Louis and Mary Valinda Alexander Miller. And she was in costume in this picture, but this is around the age that she was when she meets Thomas Edison. And by the way, we had the privilege of having members of the Edison family, their descendants, her great-grandson among them, visit last week. And it's always an honor to have members of the Edison family, the Miller family, and we're very grateful for any insights they can provide. And this place is Oak Place, and it's in Akron, Ohio. That's where Mina grew up, and it kind of sat up on a hill in the bluff, and you could oversee the city. This is the way it looked when Mina was young, right here. And over here on the right was Oak Place today. One of our historians, Maxine, has been to visit it, take pictures, and it looks a lot different now. Excuse me. It has a number of apartments. It is on the National Register of Historic Places, though. And I can imagine as a child, it was probably a wonderful place to visit. I had never seen this picture of Mina before. It's about when she's 15 years old. Mina was brought up in a family that believed in the value of education. Her father, Louis, was an inventor of agricultural equipment, including the Buckeye reaper and mower. He had several patents, and he was also the co-founder of Chautauqua Institute, which was founded in 1874 by Miller and Methodist Bishop John Hale Vincent as a teaching camp for Sunday school teachers. And if a few months ago, you might have heard about Chautauqua being in the news because it still exists today, though in a little bit of a different, more general education form. But the author Salman Rushdie was there when he was stabbed by somebody. Fortunately, that's not a good memory to bring up, but they've had many well-known people there over the years, but they did make the news recently. And it was originally founded as Chautauqua Lake Sunday School Assembly as an educational experiment, not of school vacation learning. It was successful and broadened almost immediately beyond courses for Sunday school teachers, and it's kept broadening, by the way, to include academic subjects, music, art, physical education. While founders Louis Miller and John Hale Vincent were Methodist, and actually Methodist Episcopal, it was called at the time, other Protestant denominations participated from the first year onward. And today, Chautauqua continues to be ecumenical in spirit and practice. And this is from their website, by the way. Chautauqua's Department of Religion represents distinguished religious leaders of many faiths from this country and abroad, both as preachers and teachers, and they are a great source of information about Mina, as is the Edison papers, and of course, her home in Glenmont in New Jersey, and her home here in Fort Myers. And there's a picture of her with some of her siblings. Do you like the bicycle in the background? And friends at Oak Place. They were a very close family. And I have never visited Chautauqua, a place I've always wanted to visit, but my husband has been there before. Mina graduated with distinction from Akron High School. I love this picture of her with her hat that she's decorated herself. The graduation program listed her as a speaker of an address entitled Among the Foundations. That fall, she attended Miss Abby Johnson's home and day school for young ladies in Boston. She also studied music in Boston with a professor of harmony at the New England Conservatory of Music. And that late June, she left school for a while and she made a abbreviated tour of Europe, which sometimes would take a year. I think she did it in 3 or 4 months with siblings, returning to Miss Johnson's in October, which I don't think she was particularly excited about. While visiting family friends, the Gillilands in Winthrop, Massachusetts, where they were renting a home, and by the way, they did have an apartment in Boston on Huntington Avenue, she was introduced to the famous inventor, Thomas Edison, who had been widowed the previous year. So she was an acquaintance of the Gillilands. Edison was a friend of the Gillilands. Thomas Edison had asked Mrs. Gilliland, her name was Lillian, to introduce him to some eligible girls, his words, not mine. She invited 3 women. It was Mina that Edison was drawn to. And there's one named Louise that will become a family member. She eventually will marry Mina's brother. And then there was another one named Daisy. And then maybe it was Daisy that was a blonde because Edison's daughter, Marion, was drawn to her because that's what her mother had been. Edison had lost his wife about a year and a half before, and just didn't feel like he could, with his time he devoted to his work, that he could raise his children on his own. And he wanted a companion. And again, what's known about Edison, not from me. Well, Edison was definitely smitten with Mina. And in fact, they were keeping journals. He had bought them and thought they would read them aloud for entertainment purposes. And it's the one and only time that Edison ever kept a journal. And he talked about Mina and said he got nearly run over by a streetcar thinking about Mina. This is the Miller Cottage at Chautauqua, August of 1885. And he was there to convince Mina's parents to let her visit the White Mountains of New Hampshire with the Gillilands, Edison and his daughter, Marion. And I think Louise actually went along on this ride as well. So this is the Miller Cottage at Chautauqua Institute. I love how they have it decorated. The downstairs is apparently where the parents had their bedroom, and the 5 girls shared a bedroom upstairs. They're the chalet style. And then see the tent over here is where the boys would sleep during the summer. And it was said that one time when Ulysses S. Grant, the Civil War general and president, was visiting, he took a nap in this tent. I have read that this is not really big, and it didn't have a super big kitchen because that wasn't a priority for Mina, because even when she would come back there later on, she would eat her meals out. In 1875, the Millers commissioned one of the country's first prefabricated houses. Think about that. Was Edison influenced by that? Because they were kind of pre-cut the lumber for the homes in Fort Myers. It was a Swiss chalet type structure made of pine and produced piece by piece using a pattern in the stick style of the period. He had the pieces shipped by a train to Jamestown and from there taken by steamboat to Chautauqua. Then that's what it was called and where it was assembled. And by the way, I think the Miller family and the Arndt family, all descendants of mine, owned it for many years until they sold it to the Chautauqua themselves to have it preserved. And that'll be one of my dreams, to visit there sometime. But anyways, Edison shows up. He doesn't particularly like visiting there from what I've read that much, but he was certainly there to get her parents to agree to this trip. And I'm sure it's not something normally they would want their daughter going off with an older man, but they had enough chaperones that I guess he succeeded. I like this picture of Mina too. The entourage went to a resort in New York and had a brief stay in Montreal, which are things I had never known. I thought they went right to the White Mountains. And I am from New Hampshire, so I am always excited about talking about my home state as well. Before I'm at the Maplewood Hotel and Bethlehem, and I put Pennsylvania, but it should be New Hampshire. The proposal from Mina, Edison to Mina, took place while they were in the White Mountains. And he said that apparently and he also agreed that he had taught her Morse code the day before so that he could use the method of tapping out Morse code, Mina, will you marry me? And she will say yes, if my father agrees, as was custom of the time. And they married on February 24th, 1886 in Akron, Ohio at her parents' home. And a couple of things here. We're not quite sure when they actually met. Some people said they met at an exposition in New Orleans. I think that's been disproven, but neither Thomas or Mina was that the first time he had met her, or were there other times? They both were suitably vague about it. Now, his daughter Marion was also along, and most of the time, his three children from his first marriage, they didn't get a lot of time with him. He worked a lot. And even from his second marriage, I will say that he was a work always pretty much seemed to come first. But Marion had become her father's companion after the death of her mother, though the boys were often with the mother's family. She got to be her father's companion. Keep that in the back of your mind when he is marrying somebody that's about 7 or 8 years older than her. And now she's not going to have her father's undivided attention. They arrived in Fort Myers in early March, and the homes weren't finished like they are in this picture here. And this is later years when they owned both homes. Because the homes weren't finished, and they had an arduous trip, and they had to stay in Jacksonville in a hotel that was actually a lot better than the one they're going to be in Fort Myers, and Mina didn't like it there. So I can't imagine at the time, and keywords at the time, what she thought about this. They had to stay at the Keystone Hotel for 3 nights. It was where their friends, the Gillilands and Marion, had been staying. They had been there for a few weeks, apparently. They came down before the wedding because neither home was finished. There was a home for Edison and there was a home for Gilliland, and the lumber was pre-cut in Fairfield, Maine, just like the home in Chautauqua. After 3 days, only one of the homes was complete, and that would be the Edison home. Thus, space was tight as everyone in their party, Lillian and Ezra Gilliland, Lillian's sister, Mina, Thomas, Marion, his daughter, Marion's traveling companion, Mina's maid, Louise, and 2 other household servants were there. They had to accommodate all of them in this 3-bedroom home with 1 room for the servants. There was no running water, said Mina, no electricity, no sewer. And I love this last one, and I'd be the same way, no ice. I need ice as well, Mina. It was pretty rough. There was just like a lot of scrub and dirt, and it was still a cattle town. So I understand Mina might not have been overwhelmed by its beauty at the time. Mina had the choice of having a home in the city or outside in the country, and this is what she chose. This gentleman was going to jail for financial misdeeds, so he purchased this for Mina as a wedding present. They moved in after their Fort Myers honeymoon. So this had 23 rooms, and later on, I believe they added several more bathrooms, but this is their home, Glenmont, in West Orange, New Jersey. So you can compare and contrast the 2 homes as well. A lot more luxuries, amenities, things available there. And this is the 3 children of Thomas. It's from his first marriage. And his wife died at a very young age of 29. We're not sure why. One newspaper article said morphine overdose, but it also said congestion of the brain. And we can't be 100% sure, though. It certainly was common to treat yourself with morphine at the time, and she also suffered from debilitating headaches. There's Marion, named Dot, Thomas Jr., named Dash, so in birth order, and William Leslie. He was inventor, a graduate of the Sheffield Scientific School at Yale in 1900. And if I forget, I hope I remember to talk about them over the years and how their relationship progresses. But realize mine is 20 years old. Edison is 39. Marion is going to be, she is 13. Thomas is about 10, and they don't even go to the wedding. They don't go to Fort Myers. And William is about 8 there when Mina marries Thomas. And then they will have 3 children, Marion, Mina has 3 children with Thomas. So he had same number of children from each marriage, and 2 boys and a girl. Madeline, who has a strong personality, a feisty person, very interesting. Charles, a strong person in a good way as a woman in a time period where women were just learning to speak up, and Theodore, the baby of the family. And I'll talk a little bit about Theodore and his significance in a minute. The Edisons returned to Fort Myers in 1887. It was a time of change. Mina was expecting as well as adjusting to being a stepmother, and she actually ends up miscarrying this baby. And I think she has 2 other miscarriages, but she gets pregnant again pretty quickly. It will be also the last year they'd be neighbors with the Gillilands. Edison and Mr. Gilliland had a falling out, people that had been close as brothers. He believed he had the rights to sell some of the rights of the phonograph, but he got money that Edison didn't know about, which he thought was dishonest, and they were never reconciled, which I always found very sad. And the Edisons, I don't know if it was because of this or numerous other things, or he was just so busy, but he doesn't return to Fort Myers again until 1901. And by the way, that first year, Mina helps him out in his lab. The first materials for the lab get lost at sea. The second set of materials delivered, but they forgot to reorder a generator. So that first year he had no electricity. But the city shows up the next year when he lights up the property. So they won't be here for quite some time. I wanted to talk about this. This ties in with Theodore, because this is in Akron, Ohio, outside of Mina's home. You could look down and see this, and this was a monument that was built to the men that were going off to serve in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. It was a war that only lasted a few months. It certainly was a war that no wars, in my opinion, maybe are ever necessary, or it should be a last resort, but this seemed to be one. Some people believe Hearst newspapers, some believe President Teddy Roosevelt pushed for us to get into it, but no matter what, this was to the men, and this was in Akron, so you can see it's good size, and the Millers could see it easily from their home in Akron. So 1898, this is about 13 years after Mina, not 13 years, 3 years after Mina and Thomas married. Well, Theodore Goat Miller, her brother, number 11 of 11, goes off to war. And he was with Teddy Roosevelt at San Juan Hill, Kettle Hill, and he is wounded and dies a week later. And very quickly, this monument comes down. I'm going to guess it was tied into the Miller's grief, and Akron being very attuned to that. And so it was no more. And the young men that went off to that war, I don't think they knew what they were going for. They thought it would be more of an adventure and glamorous, and war is never that. But they didn't know. But how Theodore Edison came about is that Mina has her baby about 3 days later, and she names him after her youngest brother. They were all heartbroken in the Miller family, and he's Theodore Miller Edison. And shortly thereafter, she loses a sister. And then her father, who had a heart condition, was on his way to New York for treatment. I believe this is about 6 months later, and he passes away. So the Miller family had unbearable grief. And Mina went through so much right after having a baby. And she was, It's just heartbreaking. And again, I got the dates wrong. It is about 13 years later, because Theodore is the baby of the family. But I want you to think about the resiliency of Mina, of course, the whole Miller family, but they did go through a lot. I took this, this is from the Ohio Memory Collection. I had never seen this picture before, and it shows Tom, and this is what they have on their site. It shows Thomas and Mina Edison experimenting in their private laboratory. Well, Mina was not, unless it was down in Fort Myers, which I don't, but this couldn't have been because it was, well, it could have been because their daughter took the picture. I'm going to guess it was in New Jersey, though. Their daughter, Madeline Edison, took the photograph with her Brownie camera, which was invented in 1900 and marketed by Eastman Kodak. It's simple enough for a child to use. I believe it was one of those where you look down into it, but it said their private laboratory. The only time Mina ever really worked with Edison in the laboratory was their first year of marriage. So this might have been a posed picture, but I do like it. After a 13-year absence, the Edisons returned to Fort Myers in 1901, and they met their new neighbors, Tootie and Bradford McGregor. Ambrose McGregor had already passed away, and so the Edisons had not met him. Mina updated every room in the house and widened the porch by 1902. So from 9 feet to about 14 feet. And by 1906, they bought back the home next door after the Gillilands had sold it to the McGregors, and then the McGregors sold it to Harvey Heitman, who immediately almost traded it to the Travers. And so they bought the home from their newest neighbors, Travers, for $4,850. They had paid $7,000 for it 4 years before. And Thomas and Mina had the guest porch widened to match the Edison porch. And they kind of changed some of the rooms in the homes. The kitchen was moved over there, and the servants were moved over there as well. But realize that Edison and Gilliland originally had mirror images of each other's homes built. By 1907, Thomas and Mina became more active members in Fort Myers community. They were in Fort Myers almost every winter, and they invested in a country club, and they donated money towards the town library. And Mina, over the years, is going to become more and more a part of this. Mr. Edison made the offer to the town to plant royal palms. That was an endeavor that didn't have a happy ending because they weren't able to get them out of Cuba because there was yellow fever. They got planted. Some of them died. There was a bill for more greater cost of the royal palms than Edison thought there should be, and the city ended up paying for them, and it kind of left a little bad feeling briefly with the city. And in coming years, Mina would become increasingly involved in the community and focused on building a good relationship with the town, though a bill for the swimming pool would make it a little more difficult because it was supposed to be $600 to build the pool in 1910, and it ended up being about $1,500, and Edison wasn't going to pay for it, like he didn't pay for the bill for the royal palms. But this time he gave in, and he wanted this gentleman to feel better about him that he owed the money to. So that also would fade, and as the years go by, she becomes more and more involved in the community. Edison was supposed to bring electricity to the city. That didn't happen because they didn't come back for so long. So the cannery had, so there were little blips in the road, as in any relationship. But they grow, and people are excited to have Edison there. People come to Fort Myers because Edison's there. But and yes, Edison has left a great legacy, but so is Mina. She got so involved in the community, and I'll tell you more about it. She focused on updating and unifying the two homes between 1908 and 1910. She also became concerned about the changes to the region, particularly the environment. She wasn't a fan of people shooting birds for hats. She was very interested in the environment. And remember, when we're looking back, we always have to look back, like we're way ahead into the next century. And we can't expect everyone to have the same mindset as us because things progress. Oh, this camping trip, I brought a little something to read to you. One thing, I was going to mention that Mina, the second year they were in Fort Myers, I'm backing up a little bit, She was having a hard time. She had her hands full with a stepdaughter that was a little resentful, two boys that hadn't had much parental attention for a while. And her father writes a letter. Though he was very advanced in thinking about educating women and stuff, I think he still thought it was a woman's job to make her husband happy. And he says something like this is in the Edison papers: "You have it in your power to make all around you happy and delightful. Take Mr. Edison's sayings and look as witticisms on his part, efforts of entertainment and amusement. You'll find it's just what he intends. You must try and meet him with wit, have something every time he comes home. Don't think he cares too much to hear about household affairs. I think Dot will be very much influenced by you. No doubt she sees your feelings about her, and you must win her, or else it will not be all you hope and desire. I believe you can win her. She certainly takes to your friends, and especially to Mammy and Grace. The boys certainly are impressed by your influence over them. I'm very anxious that you show your true Christian influence. Your life, not your talks, would be the character. Impress the true character you have. Show by your spirit what Christian spirit can do." And at first he was trying to help her with the boys, but I think that rapidly drops off. And the boys end up going to boarding school, as does Marion. And Mina often takes the blame for all of this, but realize that Edison was their parent as well. There's a lot of things, and she was a very young woman. There were a lot of things that went around there at the time. And also, unfortunately, at the time, men were not very involved in their children's upbringing. Now, this is about 1914, and they are going on a camping trip in Big Cypress, almost like the Everglades, just different, not as wet. And the men were just going to go out on this, that their guides didn't even want them to go. But Mina was not happy. Mina did not object to the trip. This is from the Florida Life of Thomas Edison. The other thing I was reading from was from the Edison papers. She was angry that women were to be excluded. I can never see why they think we never want to do some interesting things too. Even after 28 years of marriage, Mina struggled with her husband's personality and the burdens of position and fame. I'm getting calmer, I hope more sensible, but it comes hard. I may learn to be more submissive and not expect so much. That made me sad. No, it's okay to expect. I suppose that's my trouble. I'm longing to be first in all my husband's thoughts. It's a hard lesson to learn. And I think usually it's work. So there they are on the camping trips. It was a fiasco. It rained. It was a mess. Everything got wet. There were snakes. The Fords went along with Etzel, but you know what? She got to go. The guides didn't even think they should go, but she got to go with them. And I agree, she should have had the opportunity to do so. And this is during World War I, which I'm going to talk about next month. And Edison's placed on the Naval Consulting Board, and there's Mina in the picture there. That will not be without controversy, because at some points, I think Mina is first in Edison's thoughts. When he's on a boat in Key West, he doesn't want to be by himself. He's working as an advisor as well as doing things for his own company. And Mina was allowed on the boat, which at that time women weren't supposed to be. So there were some tense feelings, but he wanted her around. Realize also he has become very hard of hearing. She assists with facilitating communication. And in fact, Carolyn and Charles will get married while he's with the Naval Consulting Board. And Mina is there. The wedding is in Fort Myers. He is in Key West at that time, but she is with him for chunks of time. In 1920s, Mina became friends with Dr. Ella May Piper, who was, let's see if I can say this right, a podiatrist. I seem to be tripping over my own tongue today, kind of like a podiatrist, as well as running a beauty salon. And Fort Myers was not an integrated city at that time, and she certainly developed friendship with people in the community that was called Safety Hill at the time, today Dunbar. 1926. I like this story. This is a story about Rachel at the Well. I think recently they've called it Spirit of Fort Myers. And I think, in the hurricane, I got damaged and it kind of leans forward right now. I believe they are going to repair it. But the young man, James Newton, that was developing this along with his father, what's called Edison Park, it's still there today. He was having the statue done, and it was a nude statue, which was not unusual. But the story is that he tells us that Mrs. Edison and some of the ladies of the Fort Myers Women's Club look under the draped statue, and he basically, supposedly she had not wanted to receive him before when he called upon her to meet. I don't know if that's true or not, but she certainly reached out to him about this. And she asked if they could, because they had flashlights looking under there, which always cracks me up, if they could not drape, like a Grecian robe on the statue. And so he agreed to it. The sculptor was not happy, but it did happen. And that's part of the story and the legacy of Mina Edison. And I do hope this gets fixed and comes back, because it kind of stands guard over McGregor Boulevard. Mr. Edison, Mina Edison keeps great inventor ready for work. And this is focused pretty much on her role as adapting her life to her husband, help keeping him stumped, tired, happy. When he's stumped or tired, keeping him happy. That is her job, to take care of him. But she does have a lot more other jobs that develop over the years, particularly as the 20s go on. There's more and more that we learn about Mina and Fort Myers. This is in 1928, and that is the lab, the original lab. You've never seen this one unless you've been to Greenfield Village, because Henry Ford got permission to take it there. They were friends with the Fords, though I think Mina was a little frustrated because she believed that this lab should have remained in Fort Myers, and Edison had finally agreed to let him take it to Greenfield Village, where you can visit it today. So in place of that, Mina had Henry pay for a little study, a little office, so he didn't have to walk across the street. But also that they had built a rubber lab that was across the street, the one that you're familiar with, that Henry and Harvey and Thomas were all partners in. But this was taken apart and reassembled. So she got Henry to pay for the laboratory, Mina's moonlight garden behind it, and renovations to the swimming pool. And I'm just going to leave that there. Was there times that she was a little off-put by Ford, but there were times she was very impressed by his devotion to her husband. There were other times when she thought he was taking advantage of his celebrity. So there might have been occasions where there was a little tension. But and she was able to negotiate with him for these things to be done. Oh, good Lord. So 1930, Mina, and she kept the faith, is what it says here. The following year, Thomas Edison is going to pass away, and she's going to develop her own identity here in Fort Myers. I love this picture of Mina from 1930. These are her godchildren from the Stout family. There's a picture with Edison, and there's no cuddling going on there. And not that he wasn't kind, but it just looks a little more awkward. And I enjoy her looking tenderly towards children that aren't relatives of hers. I like this clipping. It says, Edison's widow says housewife now must be home executive. The label housewife should be abolished and the phrase home executive substituted for the modern homemaker. Mrs. Mina Edison Hughes, widow of Thomas Edison, said here Friday, the modern woman cannot be just a cook. She must make her home interesting by becoming informed on art, philosophy, music, history, economics, and the construction and manufacture of pottery, furniture, glass, silver, and china. She must be able to supply music of some form herself and should know the chemistries of full foods. Wow, that's a lot. I would fail a lot of those. Remember, we've got a different time. And she also works with Eleanor Roosevelt on preserving spaces, and she's on the board of, in New Jersey, of, I can't think of what it's called, but some kind of trail that focuses on preserving open spaces there. And there's an article about her in McCall's magazine. There's an article about her and Eleanor Roosevelt about women working and being home executives. There's an article written about her by Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, the famous environmentalist, something that Mina was very interested in as well. Some information from our files. She was very involved in local garden clubs. In 1930, the year before Edison died, she attended 27 garden club meetings. She spoke to many neighborhood groups about the importance of beautifying the landscape, as well as having landscape that appealed to birds. And she belonged to a number of garden clubs. In 1928, Mina invited 20 town leaders to Seminole Lodge. The initial meeting culminated in the formation of the Fort Myers Round Table, which continued to bring important civic leaders together around the large oak table in her Seminole Lodge dining room. The group focused on civic beautification, working to clean up vacant lots and raise dilapidated buildings, beautify roadways, and set up neighborhood gardens. They refurbished the railroad station, planned a new city park, and even concerned themselves with the conservation of fish in the Caloosahatchee. During Christmas of 1929, the only year they were here for Christmas, she personally helped hand out food baskets to the needy. She served as the salesperson at Flossie Hills Women's Apparel to benefit a project at the Women's Community Club. This was so successful that the project was repeated at Robin Stuckey's, where she decorated a window display with her personal china and linens. She served as the chairman of the Safety Hill Garden Club, visited the area several times to oversee beautification efforts, and helped organize community events. Mina was later invited to speak at the dedication of Dunbar High School in 1937. And I just want to make sure that you know how significant the role was that she played in the Mina's Moonlight Garden. She hired the first female landscape architect. I don't think I have that pic. Oh, I do. There we go. And this is from something that was written. It was in a book. This is, you can find it online. It's by, I'm going to tell you her name. It is by Ann Yetch, and it's called Mina Miller Edison, Education, Social Reform, and the Permeable Boundaries of Domestic Space, 1886 to 1940. In Moonlight Garden, though, I think is one of her legacies as well. As her self-identity changed and her influence grew, her imprint on the riverside landscape of the Edison's Fort Myers estate changed the grounds from a utilitarian working space to a graceful feminine surrounding. She continues, Mina Miller Edison broke tradition, no gendered social boundaries in a genteel manner, and left behind a record in social and reform, the urban landscape, and environmental activism that extended far beyond the confines of her home. And it's a long article. It's about 16 pages. There's a lot of things I agree with. I do think while she did some things that were totally would have seemed out of the norm for her, except that she was raised by a father that believed in education, the environment and stuff, she also had somewhat during that time period, because of the way she was not brought up by her mom to be a liberated woman in any way. So I think she was a mix of both things, but that's just my opinion. The other thing I want to tell you is that history is very fluid. We're always uncovering new information. There's a lot of letters out there. Mina was a prolific letter writer. I haven't been able to read them all, but as I told you, there's so much more information out there. But there's a Moonlight Garden. This was quite a few years ago. It has some damage during the storm, but our wonderful horticultural department, Debbie and Karen really has worked hard on this, and she's an expert. If you ever want to know more about that garden, the Mina's role in it, she's the person to talk to. In 1929, Mina persuaded the Fort Myers Rotary Club to donate money to form a fund to purchase hospital equipment. And I love this little clipping, Mr. Edison's birthday cake to be sold for the Red Cross, slices to be offered at Heitman Arcade at 10 a.m. today. And she was instrumental in getting the local Red Cross in 1931 to participate in the national drive to aid victims of the Dust Bowl. As a result of her encouragement, the Red Cross made her an honorary chairman of the drive. She lobbied local groups to support the effort. She even donated the leftover cake from the dedication of the Edison Bridge, and people bought it, and she raised money, presiding over a cake sale booth and donning a Red Cross cap. In 1931, after the death of Thomas Edison, she sent a bouquet of roses to each patient in Lee Memorial Hospital with a note that read, "This note of cheer is sent with my sincere wish that your recovery may be speedy and in memory of Mr. Edison." In 1932, Mina made the grounds of Seminole Lodge available for summer classes on plant and bird life for local children. And she didn't think she was going to be able to come back because though when she wasn't enamored of the rough town place that Fort Myers was, it grew in her heart when she was here on a regular basis. She did a lot. She was, Edison was here and he enjoyed his time and some people got to know him. But this is the woman that put Fort Myers in her heart and worked with so many different groups and was involved in so many charities and formed that round table. I really think that her legacy is just as strong as Thomas Edison's here. And then there's this article that when Thomas dies, there was a codicil to his will drawn up a few months before his death. And William accuses Mina Miller Edison's stepmother and Charles of having undue influence because the two boys get most of the money. The others shared in a trust. But over the years, they all received a fair amount of money, particularly ones from the first marriage at times. And he said, he said he was going to contest the will, and I'm not sure who will join me. He was hoping that his siblings from the first marriage plus Madeline would, but Thomas Edison Jr. said he would not be a party to it. And by the way, Edison had put the Fort Myers home in Mina's name. Many things were put in her name, some as early as the late 1880s, and the home in Fort Myers was. He did help his children get homes over years. Realized the children from his first marriage had a lot of trauma. Maybe Thomas Edison Jr. tried to be an inventor like his father. It wasn't successful. But he always seemed to look to Mina as his mother after his birth mother died, taking her place, but creating a place for her. Marion, at first, things weren't easy between the two of them. But after Edison dies in the 30s and in the 40s, she becomes closer to his stepmother. I don't feel like William ever did. William, interesting person. He goes off to 2 wars and he's really miserable every time and wants to get out of it. Obviously, there was some resentment, and the 2 boys, particularly Charles, it seemed to be the favored ones. But I don't believe anything ever happened from this. And I think when all the bills are paid, if the book, The Wizard of Menlo Park, says there's about $1.5 million left. But realize over the years, everybody got something. In 1935, Mina married Edward Everett Hughes, who she met as a child when their families had summer homes in Chautauqua. He died in January 1940 in New Jersey, and this is about her wedding, and I was happy that she had some happiness. And by the way, I never told you that she was informally engaged to the co-founder's son of Chautauqua. In fact, one of the articles I read actually says that she was secretly engaged, but I don't think she was ever madly in love with him. I do think her family was happy to have her marry Edison, though it always was interesting to me that though maybe not as devoutly strong in the Christian faith as the Vincents, the other co-founder, her father certainly was, and Edison was not a believer. I'd say he was an agnostic, but he was very accepting of his daughter marrying Edison, for what that's worth. So he dies in 1940, and she had become Mina Miller Edison Hughes. And when he passes away, so she lost 2 husbands, she takes back the last name of Hughes. When I did something on Buckingham Field, I wanted to say that Mina did a lot for the troops, visited them. She met up with somebody, and this is an article. There's a lot of articles in the news press. Newspapers.com is another great resource, and how she got a tour of the base of the bomber group. I think she visited with the soldiers both at Buckingham Field and at Page Field. She had some over to her house. She wrote letters to their parents. And I think that is, and she went to a dance one time. I thought that was a great legacy that she had, because they do their training here in Fort Myers before they go off to war. And here is the other legacy I can never thank her enough for. This is Mina. In February 1947, Mina deeded Seminole Lodge to the city of Fort Myers as a botanical garden and to preserve the legacy of Thomas Edison. That same year, Mina Miller Edison died at 82 on August 24th, 1947. She was buried next to Edison in a cemetery in Orange, New Jersey, before they were disinterred and buried together at Glenmont, where they are today. This is in February. She will die in August. What a gift she left to the city of Fort Myers and the home. And then we that helped try to help preserve it over the years. We will come and go, but that will always remain. And what a gift she gave to the city. And their home in New Jersey is run by the National Park Service. And I believe that's the mayor, and Sidney Davis, the husband of Vern Davis, is also in this picture. We would like to offer our sincere congratulations to our First Lady of Fort Myers upon drawing together of so many thousands of people. Mrs. Thomas Edison and her Flower Guild have done more this winter to banish gloomy pessimism than any one factor. Last night, the thousands of smiling, happy faces surrounding Mrs. Edison and her Flower Guild ladies is a substantial corroboration that the people believe and endorse what she's doing to make Fort Myers the most beautiful city in Florida. And that is also part of her legacy. Just a quick, some of my sources, Chautauqua websites, Chautauqua newspaper, the National Archives, National Park Service, newspapers.com, the Ohio Memory Project. This that was in the book there of writings about women. The Thomas Edison papers, don't miss that. Edison by Edmund Morris, The Papers of Thomas Edison, New Beginnings, Florida Life of Thomas Edison by Michelle Albion. There's so many more sources. As I said, I could have done a 5-part series, but I wanted this to whet your appetite. Now, next year, oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, she was really into friends with Ding Darling. There's a lot of correspondence between the two of them. That is out on Sanibel. He was a political cartoonist, but there was a nature preserve there out that's heavily damaged out on Sanibel. But Mina had a close relationship with him as well. So think of us here, recovering from the hurricane, and think of the legacy that Mina left. By the way, they often visit Sanibel as well. There's just such legacies here in Fort Myers that we can attribute to the Edisons, and how I'm sure they wishing that they would wish for the area to heal quickly. Next month, I will be talking about Christmas during the Great War, and that's when we didn't know there would be a second war. Some of the things that happened and the truce. And I'm going to talk a little bit about William Edison, because he does go off to World War I as well. If you ever have any questions, my email is hshaffer, SHAFFER @EdisonFord.org. Suggestions. I appreciate you and you joining with me every month. And remember, these end up on our Edison Ford YouTube channel under digital. If you type in digital discussions, Edison Ford, you can get mine, all of mine, and some that Adam did as well. And sometimes I stumble over my words, and I'm a work in progress. It's strange when you're doing one of these things, because you can't have feedback from people. I can't see how they're reacting to you, but I appreciate your support. I hope you'll find out more about Mina. There's a book coming out on her in the spring called Seduced by the Light by Alexandra Reimer, who worked on the Edison papers. I don't know what kind of light it paints Edison in, but I think you should pick it up and read it and judge for yourself. And there's always new information being uncovered. So that's the end of that. I'm screen sharing. Does anybody have any questions or anything else to say? It doesn't look like it. I'm going to look one more time. I thank you for joining me. I'll meet with you next month. I do hope you'll join me. And if there comes a time when you think that these have outlived their usefulness, please let me know, because we are doing things in person now, but I know not everybody can get here. And with the hurricane, it's hard to find places to stay. But the legacy of Thomas Edison and Mina Edison is very important to me. So thank you for joining. And as there's no questions or comments, I will plan on seeing you next month. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.